Welcome back to Season 1, Episode 9 of the TURD Podcast, also known as the Trail Ultrarunning Race Directors Podcast. I'm your host, Shalini Bhajjan. Today, we're closing out Season 1 with a conversation that's a little different from our usual storytelling. In this episode, we'll be discussing the issues currently impacting our sport, the changes shaping its future, and how we, as race directors, along with our communities across each region, are evolving with it. I'm excited to welcome back Amy Rusiecki, race director for Vermont 100 and East Coast Trail Running, and Katy Farrell, co-race director for Rainshadow Running, to chime in and discuss where we are. So let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast, Amy and Katy.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you for chatting. And I am going to start with the elephant in the room, so to speak, that we're all learning, evolving, and I guess it will continue to change the sport as we know it. Kind of a beaten horse, or we've beaten the horse to the death on diversity, inclusion, non-binary, and transgender policies. So, and we'll also touch on athletes with disabilities. So I'm going to start with Katy. I know you've been very vocal about being the voice and also openly, having discussions where a lot of us lack either the know-how or, where to start. So let's kind of dive into that and talk about just policies of gender inclusion here.
Yeah, an issue I'm very passionate about. I am gender fluid and part of the genderqueer, gender expansive community. And I think this is such a important topic at this time as well, just in our country with trans rights being under such serious attack, that we can't be milquetoast or neutral in our approach to how we welcome people and the kind of spaces that we create. So I feel very passionate about trying to move our spaces forward, our community forward in being more trans affirmative.
Sure. Amy, with that, I'm gonna kind of reach out to you and talk to me a little bit about where your events that you're race directing are as far as gender inclusion. And then I know you also have a pretty definitive policy on disabilities and athletes with disabilities. So,
Yeah, so feel free to rein me in because we're going to try and follow that through line.
sure.
Yeah, I think, similar to what Katy said, I 100% agree. It's an important time, and I think there are a lot of spaces right now that aren't being welcoming and inclusive to non-binary and trans people in general.
Sure.
And I'm glad that there's a lot of races that are. That's something that similarly, I know a lot of people that this impacts, and certainly I'm in Western Massachusetts, there is a thriving queer community here. And so
Sure.
I try to do everything I can to be inclusive at the races. But one of the things that I think is really important is like, I am not in the queer community, which means I don't know everything. I may have
Sure.
blind spots. I may have things that I don't understand. And so I always want to be like careful that I'm not speaking from a place of authority, because I think it is important for me and other race directors to listen to the community, listen to what people need or how they want to be represented, showcased, welcomed, like what that looks like. And I'll also say, even like when it comes to inclusion for non-binary athletes, like that's something, it's actually been an evolution for a while.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay. I think it was probably about a decade ago where there was just I wasn't seeing any policies to include non-binary
Right.
athletes where
Sure.
I was, but I was proud to work with a registration company that they were the first registration company that I know of that allowed athletes to register as they identified, which was non-binary athletes. So this is the company
Yeah.
runreg.com. A lot of other ones have taken it on now, but they were doing this a decade ago. And so I was really, really, really proud to work with them and have them even just allowing people to register as they identify. And
Sure.
then initially how I was doing it, so we're talking 10 years ago, how I was framing that was athletes register as they identify, but they compete versus their hormonal peers. So
Right.
if you were an estrogen-based athlete, you would be in the women's
Women's
category.
category. Yeah.
Um, I have since evolved from that, and now it's
Sure.
just equal. We have three equal categories at the races that I host. And again, I don't think that's the perfect category because you're also putting under the category of non-binary that's
Sure.
also still pretty broad,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a step in the right direction. And I think one of the things that I've tried to do in general is just be like, I'm not going to let perfection and getting this 100% right be the enemy of taking a step forward.
Sure.
And I think that's the
Sure.
important thing is like, none of us can sit here and be like, I want this to be perfect. And I think, frankly, that's what stopped other race directors. They didn't want to get it wrong, but they were
Right.
so fearful of getting it wrong that they weren't doing anything. And
Exactly. Yeah.
unfortunately, that was making people, I think, feel less included. And so I at least
Sure.
did something as imperfect as it was, but it was a step in the right direction and it started a conversation and it was an evolution. It has
Sure.
changed
Sure.
over 10
Yeah.
years.
And I think we're still evolving.
Absolutely.
I definitely think that there's so much more to happen and come, which will definitely shape where the sport is at the moment. Katie, what about you guys at Rainshadow? I know you've been very, as I said, vocal, and James himself talked about it. Where are your policies on all of this?
Yeah, so we are using WebScore because it has given us the option to let runners write in their gender so they can self-describe. And they can self-describe their pronouns. And they also have the option of opting out of that and just prefer not to say. And we also give runners the option of whether they want to be included in public results lists or sign up lists and results lists, and if they want to be competitive for prizes. And so, some of that is related to gender equity issues. Some of it is more broader privacy issues. Like,
Sure.
I think I have a background in working with victims of domestic violence, and so for somebody who has issues with say a stalker in their life or something of that nature, which is a very real issue
Yeah.
for a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
people. Having a public entrance list where somebody can find where you're going to be at a certain date and a certain time can be problematic, obviously. And there's just like such a wide variety of reasons why people might want to keep their information private.
Sure.
So we like to give runners that agency and that option. Um, and then also, a lot of times, because we still do have such a small field in some of these more gender expansive categories, there are some runners who are like, I totally want a prize and to be celebrated, even if there's
Sure.
only a few people in my category. That's meaningful to me. And other folks are like, I do not want that attention.
Sure.
Don't. Please no. So
Yeah.
just giving them like the maximum agency is what we have landed on for the time being. But I totally agree with both of you that this is, even our language is going to continue to
Oh, yeah.
evolve and catch up. And,
Sure.
and the things that we're doing right now that might be very progressive will be antiquated in 10 years.
That's how it
And
works.
20
Yeah.
years, and that's how it works. And I do think there is something really important about just being willing to have those conversations and get in the arena and be willing to make mistakes and then take ownership and learn from them and move forward. That's so important and so needed right now.
Yeah. I
I
absolutely
love
agree.
that. I love that, Katie, what you're saying about like giving people the agency of like opting out. And specifically, the example that I have of part of, one of my close friends who we ran Hellgate together and over 13 hours of running Hellgate together, hammered out what do you think would be the best policy? This is a friend of mine who identified as non-binary at the time, and I just was like, there's got to be a better way. Let's try something. Let's bat ideas around for 13 hours. But they were an athlete that even at like races where they could identify as non-binary, they didn't check that box because then people who didn't know that that's how they identified, it was forcing a conversation that at the time
Sure.
they just weren't willing to have. And so that's such a great point to just allow people the freedom to,
Yeah.
put it out
Um,
there or not, you
right.
know.
And I totally agree with where both of you guys are on this subject. Just kind of echoing what Amy was saying. I have had athletes that previously have chosen a gender, and then, as things are kind of opening up, the sport's also growing. There's a lot more visibility. We're evolving. The next, few registrations came in under non-binary category. And like the only reason I knew same name, and I was like, okay, that was kind of like my waking up moment where it's like, okay, what else needs to happen? What else can we do? Whether that's awards or, however else are we treating everybody on the same plane field of things. Um, with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about data. So, you guys are both using different platforms. I'm using a completely different platform, and I know my platform that I'm using has quite a bit of limitations when it comes to, just non-binary category. Where are you? Let's start with Katie. What sort of data collecting are you doing as far as registrations that are coming that are not male and female athletes?
Certainly, we're always taking note of that, and part of that is also for us as race directors to make sure that we're using people's preferred pronouns and things of that nature.
Sure,
Um, and what we've been finding is very much a kind of if you build it they will come,
sure.
and we've had something that I'm seeing, speaking to what you were mentioning, Amy, is there is quite a trend of several people who reach out to us or put in their or choose for their information, this is how I identify, these are my pronouns, but I'd like this information private, and please just keep me in the male category or something of that nature. um, and there's actually quite a big trend, I think, towards people who are preferring that privacy.
Sure.
And that's it's actually something I experienced this summer when I registered for the first time as a non-binary runner, which I identify as gender fluid. I'm also comfortable with the with being in my identity as a woman and socialized as a woman.
Sure,
So I'm in a unique position there where kind of like what Amy was speaking to, non-binary is this umbrella category.
sure.
But I will say that I found it extremely scary and cortisol spiking
Yeah,
because it does put a bit of a spotlight on you that
sure.
that is not something that a lot of us would prefer, especially in a community. Well, I mean, just a world right now where unfortunately just existing in that identity is so controversial that it
Yeah,
invites a lot of commentary, and sometimes all the way to abuse.
sure, sure.
We've seen where runners have been celebrated, for example, online who are non-binary, and the comments are just vile.
Yeah,
And a lot of people just don't want to deal with that, and understandably.
sure.
So anyway, so I'm what I'm seeing is that there are more and more folks who are identifying in gender expansive ways, and a big trend towards a lot of them preferring that privacy as well, which I think is an interesting thing to note.
Sure. Um, Amy, I'm going to put it on you. What sort of I know you said you had been tracking it for what, 10 years now or so, give
Yeah.
or take. What does that look like from your end? Are you able to just quickly go into a folder and pull up? Um,
I could, and I don't know that I have studied it as as
sure.
carefully as Katie, it sounds like, has in terms of the numbers. But I also, to be fair, the limitations in my registration system, you have four options, and it's male, female, non-binary, or prefer not to answer.
Yeah,
And so at least it has those. And I have a blurb on my website that talks a little bit about our non-binary policy. But one of the things that I talk about in there is like, I acknowledge that that's not the right fit.
sure.
but just kind of trying to be more expansive, understanding that you can only have so many options and so many categories, and just kind of trying to make the best that we can. That being said, I'll put a plug in that there is a race that I've hosted where I'm my nonprofit partner is they're a nonprofit that puts on like outdoor activities for members of the queer community. And so this
Sure.
race that we put on, it's called the All of the Above Trail Fest. And so it's all the above, like we don't care what box you check, all of the
Sure.
above is welcome. And it's a race where we don't even collect gender when people register. It's a prediction run. And so the prizes
That's
are to the
funny.
people
Yeah.
that predict their time. And so it's just
Sure.
another twist to just kind of say like, hey, you know what, here, we're going to just try to push those boundaries a little further and just,
Sure.
like I don't need to know that information.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a fun little twist, and it's a great event with a really amazing community.
Yeah.
So
That definitely sounds like a way to kind of just ease the tension and not have that, headlamp right on you because
right.
you picked a certain gender.
Right.
So I guess this is more of a question for all of us. I know where you're in the Northeast, and with Katy being, in Washington, your communities are much, how should I put it? I guess a little more open, right, compared to the Midwest, which is where I am. But those policies have to go into place, regardless of, what sort of attention it's bringing and whatnot. So just, briefly touch on, Katie's already talked about just not feeling comfortable and having, not feeling safe in this environment. Do you guys think there's ever going to be, also going back to data collection, and I guess it's just an open question because data is so important, right? We look at, I know I'm a data nerd, so I have to look at, who came and what the time was. So I feel like, yes, it's for now where we are. It's okay to give somebody an option not to answer it. But I feel like as, we're getting more and more people that are not male and female, running, being part of the sport, we could have that data, you know. At least that's how I feel like that data becomes important, which means are we ever going to get to a point where none of this is going to matter?
Mm.
Well, and I wonder too, I think just as, Katie has experienced and as many have experienced, the data that we're getting is only based on the snapshot at the moment when they register
Right.
because, gender identity can be fluid, your age is fluid, like
Sure.
the age that we're at in 1 year, a year, like all of these
Yeah,
things,
it changes.
that point can change. And so, yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, but
Yeah.
also, I guess, not a static, you know.
Yeah. So kind of, wrapping up that component of, fairness, safety, inclusion, um, are there any like three top things that either one of you wants to put out and say, here's what is happening and here's what we would like to see happen? I know it's kind of a loaded question because we all want certain things to happen, but just in all fairness, where would you go, Katy?
Yeah. Well, I think a primary thing that I would love to see happen is for our focus to be more about the community rather than the competition, the business, the commercialization of our sport that we're seeing more and more of.
Sure.
I think bringing it back to the community and taking care of the people in our community as the primary value that's guiding us is really important. Um, Another thing I'd like to see is more focus on intersectional justice and equity. Because there are experiences of runners, for example, I was speaking recently with a runner who is Two Spirit, and they have an extremely complex and rich and storied relationship to the land, to the community, to what running is. Understanding how different people bringing their different life experiences
Sure.
To the events is something we can create more space to honor and acknowledge, and even be guided by ultimately. And that kind of intersectional justice includes equity, it includes climate justice. It's all
Sure.
like deeply interrelated, I believe. And then maybe the third thing I'd like to see is more of that willingness to get into the arena, have the conversations, be open to failing publicly and taking accountability publicly and moving forward in a good way publicly,
Sure.
to an openness to that and a commitment to seeing those values through to their logical conclusions, so that we're really moving forward in a positive way.
Yeah. Amy, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I like that last thing that you said, Katie. Like that was kind of one of the things in my mind, was just kind of thinking about like I just want the events that I put on to, I don't know, to be what the community wants them to be. And so a lot of that is being open to just listening. What are their needs? What do they want to see? What's important to them? And being open to that conversation, being humble. And I mean, that's even as simple as like a lot of my local races, the shortest trail race, like the short option would be like a 20 to 25K race. And somebody approached me and was like, I love doing your races, but I'm getting a little older. I would really love like a 10 to 15K option. Is that possible? And I was like, well, I mean, sure. I just got to put a different color flags out there. And like, there's no reason that can't happen. But I just, in my own head, was so biased because I love the ultra distance that, it just didn't occur to me until someone said that. But thank goodness they did. But I'm also proud of just being kind of open to that sort of feedback where someone can give a suggestion. I'm like, hey, you know what? We try it for a year. If no one shows up, it's okay. We tried it, but like, let's do it, And so I think that's important. And then the other thing, because I didn't get to talk about this before, but athletes with disabilities and finding ways to welcome them into the community, I think is also really important. And again, this is something that I've been doing at Vermont 100 and my other races, but really at, Vermont 100's been like the showcase race that I do, that does this, where we've had visually impaired athletes, we've had mobility impaired athletes. This past year, we actually added another athlete with disability category for the broad title of neurodivergent athletes. So athletes with TBIs, with PTSD, autism, and it's I mean, kind of the way that I describe it is like these athletes, first of all, they're already running races. Like we've all seen that, we've seen them at different races and heard stories and stuff. But I think it's important as race directors that we put policies in place so that rather than a visually impaired athlete having to reach out before they even register to say, hey, I want to do your race, but I want to know if it's okay if I have a guide, or if it's okay if I have poles because I can't see at night, or like whatever, rather than them having to reach out and advocate for whatever accommodation they need. Instead, by putting it out there, it means they get to just register like everyone else. They don't have this additional barrier of entry by having to negotiate what is allowable and what's not ahead of time. And so that's what we've been doing. And we've had a really rich history of having some pretty incredible athletes running at the Vermont over the years. So.
Katie, does Rainshadow have, from where I am currently, I have yet to encounter or have an athlete with disability sign up for any of the events. And, just kind of echoing what Amy was saying, I was all ultra driven until I had somebody come in and say, hey, we'd love to run shorter distance. And that's when I kind of looking at 5Ks, 15K, 25K events. So where are you guys with Rainshadow? Do you guys have like what's your experience been with this?
Yeah, so we're actually adding a new race to our calendar this coming year that is a 10K and half marathon because of that same feedback that we've
Sure,
heard of like folks who love this energy, love the events, but running a 25K or a 50K is not in the cards for them.
sure.
And so, that's one way we're trying to be more accessible. We have done a lot of work to make sure we're accessible. In the PNW here, there's a lot of folks we've found who have food allergies and restrictions like celiac and things of that nature. So making sure that there's always food for them that is safe and available and clearly labeled at the aid stations and things of that nature has been part of our part of what we've been committed to. Certainly, we've had a
Sure.
lot of neurodivergent athletes as part of our community as well. But I will say that we really have a long ways to go in terms of being more welcoming and open to athletes with more physical disabilities, visual impairments, things of that nature. So
Yeah.
we really don't have much experience with that. But
Okay.
I would love to grow that.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'll go
I
back
was
to
going to say
Amy.
if I can comment back on that. So one, I have openly said this for years. I welcome any race director to just steal my policies.
Sure, I did
And I
that.
know race
Nice.
directors do every once in a while. Someone will be like, "I did a race in Virginia, but it referenced Silver Hill,"
Yeah.
or like something like that. But totally okay. Like there's no reason to reinvent the wheel, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
frankly, when we developed those, we looked at Boston Marathon, California International
Sure.
Marathon, Chicago Marathon as kind of a basis. So again, there's no reason to reinvent, like steal ideas as much as you want.
Yeah,
We're all better from learning from each other.
exactly.
But the other thing that I would kind of point out, which is the interesting thing, is like you might not have known that you had, say, a visually impaired athlete do your race, but you probably have. There have been several athletes that have run several races their whole life, and technically they qualify as visually impaired.
Yeah,
They're not allowed to drive, but they can see well enough to follow someone ahead of them
sure,
and make their way through races. And so a lot of them, Vermont 100 is the first time that they check the box and actually say out loud, "Yeah, I'm visually impaired."
sure.
And they've appreciated that because they've said that, then they can have a guide with them, and all of a sudden they're running that much better. They're having that much more success because they don't have to rely on somebody who doesn't know that they're guiding them,
Sure.
guiding them.
Yeah.
So I bet you've had it.
Yes, that's
It's
such an
just
Yeah.
excellent
about
point.
opening the door and,
Sure.
and
Sure.
giving them the
So,
tools to be successful.
so with that, Amy, is that something you guys are capturing or during the registration process then?
Yeah, so I
Just
have question. It's like I mean, it's the policies are on my website, but that's one of the like custom questions when you
questions.
register is, and it's an optional one, but it's, are you an athlete with disability? And just you can drop down and select any of the different
Gotcha.
categories.
Okay.
So
So on that, just briefly touch on again, since I have not really experienced any of this, some of the challenges, or I guess some of the adjustments that you've had to make, whether that's your cutoff or starting early, like where are you on that? And
yeah, so I mean, right now we make them run the race within cutoffs. I'll
sure,
say at Vermont 100. I am limited to this 30-hour block
yeah,
that the race is open. That I mean, that is in the other races, my Beast Coast races, that is something that it's easy enough for me to do. If you're someone who's nervous about a cutoff, I'll let you start early. I want people to participate. So that's something I can do in other races. At Vermont, I'm a little more locked in because of safety and the all of the stuff. So we're not able to do that. I don't know. The challenges, I think, just sometimes come to making sure that I'm communicating it. And then, like this past summer with the neurodivergent category, it was the first year of doing that. And so it was a lot of conversations with the athletes that identified as neurodivergent to just kind of say, what are the accommodations that make sense for you? And then I had to kind of fact check that with how am I giving them accommodations that they need to be successful without giving them an unfair advantage, and what does that look like? And so partly what that looked like was things like if someone is autistic and so they come into a huge aid station, you think of like, say at Western States, a crew station, and how
Sure.
overwhelming that would be. You know, like
Oh,
we
yeah.
all of our races have aid stations like that are overwhelming. And if that's where you're going to spend 10, 15 minutes with your crew and you're autistic and really kind of impacted, that's going to be super overwhelming. So if I just say, rather than you having a crew stop there, I'm going to let your crew be one aid station before or one aid station after. So you're not getting
Gotcha.
more support, you're just getting different
Different
support.
support. Yeah.
Or letting
Yeah.
their crew set up a little outside of the bounds of where everyone else can. So at least they can do the same thing, but not in the overwhelming environment. So it just kind of looked at like things like that, where how can I give them, like, how can I meet the needs, overcome the challenges that they
Sure.
have, but in a way that's still fair to all the other competitors as well.
Right. You're right. I hadn't considered this before, but it makes absolute sense to have aid stations for athletes with disability or special needs positioned midway between the designated aid stations that we have for other runners. Katie, have you encountered this at your events?
Well, certainly in terms of things like cutoffs, that is a primary area of inclusion for a lot of athletes, and some of our events are just have unfortunately very inflexible cutoffs based on when if we're in a state park and the state park says
Sure.
you must be out of here half an hour before sunset, no exceptions, things of that nature. Then we don't have a lot of flexibility. But where we are able to be flexible and extend cutoffs, we have been moving in that direction and trying to grow that more and more. And we do offer early starts that people can request and things of that nature as well. I love hearing some of those accommodations that you've been thinking through, Amy. And part of that is just like, I'm so inspired by the thoughtfulness that that we all as race directors are trying to bring to this, because that's really what it's about is drawing out this thoughtfulness from our community and from each other, and approaching it that way, with that mind towards inclusion.
Thank you both for sharing your perspective on this. I suppose we'll continue to see how this board evolves in terms of inclusion, diversity, and everything else that comes with it. What I'd like to do now, and this is kind of a two-layer discussion, is first let's talk about race directing as a career. Amy, I know you have a full-time job and balance race directing as a side hustle, whereas Katie and I both uh, are full-time race directors. Katie, why don't you start off? The profession has changed a lot since I began race directing 12 years ago. I don't know if either of you have experienced this, but there's always been a sort of a taboo attached to race directing as a career and making money off of it. So what I hear a lot of is, well, you're making money off of race directing. And I don't understand why that's seen as such a terrible thing. I mean, we're simply trying to make a living just like everyone else. And those are kind of just some of my thoughts on this.
Ooh, well, in theory, some people are making money. I think it's really easy for folks. One, a lot of the races that we see sort of get a lot of attention are these like huge races where there is like a lot of money involved, a lot of sponsorships
Sponsors,
involved.
yeah.
Um, that is not Rainshadow. We are a very small potatoes, very small business, community driven. I make an extremely modest living at this.
Yeah.
Um, and, as you both know, it's, um, I think it's easy for a lot of folks to just look at registration price times number of registrants and think you're making that much money.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Um, and that is just so far from the case,
Sure.
both in terms of like where all of that money goes, and the expenses that we do incur, And, and the other thing is that there's a natural human fallacy. Our brains work in this way of like, we think that all we see is all there is. What we see is all there is. And so a lot of folks think, oh, what is it to be a race director? You
Right.
buy a few snacks, you slap them on the table, you give a high five, and that's all you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Um, and of course, as we all know, there's so much more to it.
Yes.
And this is frankly the most demanding, hardest, most stressful job I have ever had. And I've, worked as a teacher. I've worked as a domestic violence advocate. I've had many other hats in life. And yet very rewarding. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. I love this work. But also, when you are running a small business, as it's like it all falls on you.
Yeah.
If something goes sideways, no one else is going to fix it for you. You
Yeah.
either come up with a solution, or you might have to cancel an event and disappoint a lot of people, and that is a real hit. And sometimes that kind of thing is inevitable when it's a natural disaster, a weather event, or different things that happen. Obviously, COVID a few years ago was
Sure.
massively difficult for many of us race directors. So I just think there's so much to it. And it also is so dependent on the type of races you're doing, where you're doing them. If
Yeah.
I'm doing a single one-off permit loop race that is a 5-mile loop over and over and over, the logistics of that are wildly different than a 50-mile point-to-point mountainous race where I need to have a whole team of ham
Sure.
radio operators, of medical staff, of all kinds of contingencies, and and volunteers, obviously,
Sure.
and sometimes multiple permits. I mean, there are events where we have 7 or 8 permits we have to get, and then
Right.
others that are like a quick one-off, and all of these things really affect how much work goes into it, how many variables are at play, and it's dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. Amy, any thoughts on that?
No, I'd love to hear your thought on it because I'm the person who's, I maybe have the dream of someday having race directing, coaching, like that kind of that
Sure. Sure.
aspect of my life be a full-time job. But at this point it's not. And some of it might be the fear of that being the only
Sure.
thing because I'm an engineer and I'm logical and I
Yeah.
don't want
Yeah.
my ability to make ends meet to be based on how many people I can get to sign up or not or all those other variables. So I'd
Sure.
love to hear from you actually.
So some of my experience is very similar to what Katie just described. When I first started doing this, I wasn't really looking at race directing as a career and where it would end up going and taking me. But, when you fall in love with the sport and the work that you do, it just comes down to how am I going to make this work? And, if that means you're having to juggle a few side hustles, then that's how it goes. And I mean, I can't speak for Katie, but I have 3 other side hustles. And, it's just one of those situations that one month, you're happy to cover your mortgage and have a little extra cushion, and other months you're just kind of scrambling to figure out how you're going to make it all work. And and I do know some of it comes down to the type of races you're hosting and race directing. A lot of times there are events that I cannot put my cap on those events is 75 to 100 runners, and I cannot push that up. And depending on the park, the fees vary. Rental fees are different for each park, along with trail usage fees. And if it's a popular park, then, the permits are astronomical. Just to give you an example, one of the backyard ultras that I host here in town, it's one of my top 3 events that the fees and the overhead is pretty expensive. And part of that is no end to the race. You really don't know if you're going to be there for 2 hours, for 2 days, or for 4 days. And, if you're using the park overnight, then you're having to pay extra fees. There's tacking on the ranger's fees that here in town I have to pay for any overnight event. And, all those small things pile up pretty quickly. And all of a sudden, at the end of the year, you're trying to figure out where the money went. And that's where the expenses happen. Um, at least that's kind of where I am at. But at the end of the day, if I'm being completely honest with myself, it's extremely rewarding. Um, and I love what I do. Both of you run, so I mean, you know exactly how that feels, and race directing, and just you hold on to that feeling, and it's something that makes you feel good, um, and it's just what you're getting out of the work that you're doing. And at least for me, I have not found another career that has been as fulfilling as race directing.
Yeah, no, my full-time job of working for a public works department, it certainly does not bring me the joy that race directing does.
Right, right.
You
So,
know,
yeah.
filling a
Um,
pothole, not quite as rewarding. Necessary, but not rewarding.
right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, let's talk a little bit about something um, that I have seen on several social media platforms off lately. And one of the big questions that, always gets rotated here is the rising cost of registration fees and hosting a race. As both runners and race directors, we've all noticed that shift and how drastically, at least in my experience, it has changed since 2020. And I feel like every year the prices keep climbing, liability insurance goes up, permit fees, everything else you can think of. So, Amy, would you like to chime in here and get us started? Where does the bulk of your registration fees actually go, and why is that the case?
It somewhat depends on the race, but I'll say like the Seven Sisters Trail race, and I don't know why this is the one where I think of it like this, but it's 500 runners, and so it's just easy math where it's like for every $1,000, I'm like, well, that's $2 from a racer's registration that goes to this $5, whatever. And so it's like I give away, I mean, these nice ceramic mugs partly to try to justify, but that's like $15 of your race entry fee just goes towards the nice mug. Probably $5 to $10 of every single person's entry fee goes towards having the EMTs on
Yeah.
course because we pass through it's a 12-mile race, but we pass through 4 different towns, and each town wants to have their local EMTs on their portion of the race. And
Yep.
so I have to pay 4 different EMT to be there. The porta potties are like $500 a pop. And my quick math is normally a porta potty per 50 runners, so that's 10 porta potty, so all of a sudden it's like, and that's before I have finish line food, before I have volunteer shirts, before I have aid station food, before any of that. It's like all of a sudden, before I have a donation to the charity that we're partnering with. You look at it and it's like all of a sudden a whole bunch of the money is tied up in porta potties, EMTs, and like the permit fee is like nothing.
Yeah.
It happens to be nothing for me for that, or barely anything. But yeah, the porta potties, the EMTs, and then like the swag that I give the runners, that takes up a good chunk right there.
Yeah, at my end, it really depends on the parks department that I'm working with. And I'm sure you guys both have a similar experience with it, but your fees tend to vary based on whether it's a state park, county park, or Department of Conservation, or you're working for permits with the National Forest System. And most of my events happen in county park, Department of Conservation, and state parks. And county fees tend to add up quite a bit. And then you tack on the facility rentals, trail fees, whether it's a primitive shelter or you're paying for a fully covered shelter with heat, etc. So a chunk of your fees go towards that. Then there is taxes, you've got insurance that you need to pay. And after that comes the swag, and you don't want to skim and just get a junky piece of gear because you see runners wearing it, and you're kind of proud of that. Okay, this is a cool piece of gear. So you don't want to skim on it. And there was a period in time I could get a cotton poly blend shirt for $10, but that's not the case anymore. And the minute you start looking into, getting a cool piece of gear that as runners would value, the cost adds up. What about you, Katie? What's it like where you are as far as, the demographics there goes?
Yeah, I mean, certainly all of those things, like, depending on the land agency managing the area, the permit fees could be quite high, or they might be more minimal. Post-race food is a huge expense for us,
Yeah.
but I think a really important part of our races. Um, Certainly the EMTs, if we do have something like a ham radio team, which is not all of our races, but the ones where we do, that's another significant expense. Insurance, of course, porta potties, which have gone up in price quite a bit,
Sure.
way up.
They
Yeah.
used to be like $100 a pop.
Yeah.
I feel like when I started, like,
Yep.
and now they're like sometimes up to $500 a pop. Some of that's
Totally.
depending on where you're asking them to drive it, but
Sure.
our
Yep.
races are remote.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you've got photographers' fees.
Right.
Sometimes we have paid staff members, sometimes we don't, that might join us for the events. And then of course, which I know we're going to get into a little more, but like just all of the trail work that might need to be done ahead of time.
Sure.
We've really had to massively step up our efforts this past year. A lot of in response to a lot of the federal lands Forest Service cuts.
Sure.
And, so hosting trail work retreat parties and, things of that nature as well. Like it all really adds up. Or like, we have an event coming up in a few weeks where we just spent $3,000 on a big tent that's going to be at the start finish because it's a rainy event. So you got to have a giant tent that can hold people, and 8x10s aren't going to do it for this one. And so there's just so much of that. And then maintaining all of the, maintaining the trailer and the truck and all of the, expenses and time, that goes into things like that as well. Yeah, there's just so many things that go into it. Yeah.
One question that I guess I ask myself quite a bit and gets thrown around is, are we unintentionally making these events inaccessible to athletes who can't afford higher fees? And we all have different policies as far as discounts go, whether that's a student discount, veteran discount, different ways to make events more accessible to folks with limited income or those who have a lower income bracket. But with the rising costs across the board for everything, we've thought about creating a scholarship program or possibly covering partial bit of the fees for the participants, and they can still partake. But the budget side of it just sometimes makes it difficult. And then you start assessing, well, where can I cut back? Can I cut back on photography fees, or are there other ways that I can adjust so we can make events more accessible for lower income athletes? We'll get into that in a little bit, but I would love to hear your thoughts about making the events more accessible for lower income athletes, and if you've had an opportunity to put something in place at your ends, and what has your experience been with this?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk. So again, plagiarizing from another race director.
Sure.
There's a race director, and I'm neglecting her name, but I believe she's from the Chicago area. I stole this directly from her. I think I even like stole her language, but um, basically I have language on my website that just says, if cost is a barrier, email me and I'll give you a code. Like no justification. I don't need to hear the
Sure.
story. I'm not going to judge people and only give it to people if I connect with the story or whatever. And that's one of those things like, I think initially the logical person in me or the cynical person maybe was like, oh, are people going to take advantage of this? And the reality is a small number of people that need it
Yeah.
do take advantage in a good way of the opportunity, but I wasn't seeing people take advantage in a bad way of it.
Sure.
And so I just adjusted budgets to accommodate
Accommodate
a
that.
certain percentage. But the other thing that I do is when people register, they can make an additional donation to boost that. That's my support a runner
Sure.
fund. And so I put that out there, just say, hey, we have these policies. And I let people know once a year, beyond it being on my website and being on registration information, once a year I just send out an email that's just like, hey, remember this is out there. And
Yeah.
make sure that you tell people about it if this is important or you think that that would be helpful. But I also have some runners who are of higher means who are willing to contribute a little bit to allow that me to expand that program or allow me
Sure.
to not have to cut somewhere else in order
Yeah.
to make that.
Yeah.
And so as much as we might have some lower income athletes, I think we also have some athletes that are willing to chip in to support
Yeah.
having more people on the starting line.
Yeah. So I guess my question is this. Off the top of your head, do you know how many people reach out to you each year asking for assistance with registration fees? I feel like that's really the heart of the idea.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that I knew. I'm trying to think of per race. For a race like Seven Sisters, which that's 500 athletes, and there's maybe 5 to 10 people that reach out for that.
Yeah,
And a handful of them are, we have a local college, Hampshire College, that has a trail running team. And so some of
sure.
them are the Hampshire College runners, but then it's, numerous other people. Some people I know their story, some people I don't. And then at a lot of other races, I don't know, I would say it's maybe 3 to 5 athletes per race for a,
Yeah.
200, 300 person race is
Oh,
maybe the average. So
I mean, this is just me kind of thinking out loud. If you are hosting, for example, 10 events in a year, do you see the same person asking for discounts across, 6 or 8 of those events? And is this an occurrence, or how often is this actually happening?
there's a few athletes that have asked me multiple races in a row. I don't know about you guys though. I will say, let's say somebody does like say ask for this. I get so many emails. I honestly, the name doesn't stick in my brain. So sometimes they're like, "Thanks so much for doing that last time. I'm wondering if I can have that again." I wouldn't have remembered that I had given that to them before if they didn't put that in an
Sure.
email. And partly just because I'm kind of responding to so many emails that it doesn't stick in my head who who I'm doing
Sure.
what for. So
Okay. Um,
so
Katie,
I
I'm
don't
gonna
fully
hand it
know.
right. So Katie, how about you at Rainshadow Running? Do you guys have policies in place for this, or what are some of the programs that you guys have in place?
We have used language like that in the past of if finances are a barrier, just reach out.
Sure.
Some other things that we have in place. This one is specific to Indigenous runners. If folks are from an indigenous community whose lands we're using, all of our races are free to them. And then there's also just a 50% off for any Indigenous runner, even if we're not using their lands.
Sure.
Um, and then we also work with 2 different organizations that are Portland area based. One is Tierra Libre and one is Trail Mix Collective. And both of those organizations offer scholarships for races. Tierra Libre actually goes further and offers, they are BIPOC centered, and they actually offer in addition to the race scholarship, other resources as well, like coaching and mentorship.
Sure.
some, they've partnered with with brands who provide shoes and, the material means for folks. So there's that. And then in addition to that, we also have the volunteer pathway.
Sure.
So we offer volunteers a $25 an hour credit. So if they spend hours volunteering, then they can apply that towards races, or they can give it to, many of our volunteers don't even run our races. They just, want to be involved. So they can donate their credit to another runner, or donate it back into like that scholarship pool.
Sure.
And so that's how we have done it. It is a really, it is a really big issue. It's a struggle because, money is tight for everybody. These are really tough times. Our expenses are going way up. So, I get I also, I get the sticker shock that a lot of people have of what they're paying for some of these events. Yeah.
So just to put the sticker shock into perspective, there was a time you could sign up for a 100-mile race for about $250. Not anymore. That's something I get asked about a lot. And honestly, because of what I do when I am registering for a race myself, I don't flinch anymore. At some point, it's like, okay, it's $500 show. That's the initial sticker shock. But then you think about it, you know where the money's going, what it's being used for, and it makes more sense. But I think for runners who are not involved with race directing, or are a part of putting together an event in any shape or form, it's still tough to absorb it. They look at the fees and wonder, why is it so high? Where's all this money going?
Do you guys though like feel with the race fee, like I understand why the race fees are going up, but I also feel like not every single athlete that's signing up understands that. And so I feel like as I'm having to race registration fees, I don't know, I feel sometimes like some stress or some pressure on me that
Oh,
I
yeah,
need to make sure that I'm like
sure.
providing something that is worth the value that they've paid. And
Mhm.
so with these increasing costs, I just feel like it's that much additional pressure on me to, make every single person feel welcome, make every single
Sure.
person feel seen, celebrated, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Not just me.
I think being transparent is really important. What I've started doing is putting together end of year synopsis, so to speak, and that just generally kind of oversees funds that were being donated, money that was being matched. And I think at some point I'm perhaps overdoing it, TMI in a way, but I think people need to know where the fees are being designated. For example, our 2026 fees just went up for County Parks Department, and now you're having to pay for like a liability, and it, it just all adds up. And so telling people, here's where we are. This is why the registration costs are going up. And then, I kind of sit back and I ask myself, well, what can I do to combat these rising costs? Is there a way to cut back on things? And again, I keep going back to race photos. But then you look at photography for events, and that's such a huge part of storytelling and just memories that runners get to have and keep. So, is cutting that out of the expenses really going to make a difference? And how is that going to impact the overall experience of the runners at the event? And I guess with that, I'm curious, have you guys had to make any adjustments where you're drawing a line or cutting budgets? And how transparent do you feel you need to be about all of this? There are certain things you just can't skim. So, where are you both with this?
Yeah, for me, that's a very active consideration and conversation, and actually something that we're revising for 2026 because we've realized, certain things have been inconsistent that we've been
Right.
presenting. Certain races that are not making as much money, we have been flipping burgers instead of having
Sure.
the pizza vendor or different things like that, and realizing people really want that quality and that consistency.
Right.
So we're really focusing on bringing that consistent quality back up, because that's sort of the feedback we've gotten from our community, that people really miss it, or if there's not a
Sure.
race photographer there, they really miss it. So, for us, the focus is more on making sure the event feels like a total home run, and that each runner will feel really seen and celebrated in those ways. It is really tricky because I think this is another issue that that is related to the movement towards more commercialization in the
Oh
sport,
yeah. Yeah.
where people are now interacting with it in more of a transactional business way, whereas 10
Sure.
years ago it was like, it was a very different feeling of the community, and how you had to show up and volunteer and do trail work, or these events didn't even
Sure.
happen. And if you paid 25, $50 for the run, that's exactly where all of that's going, and
Yeah.
things are so different nowadays. And so it is a real balance. For us, I think we actually feel like we have erred in being more inconsistent in our offerings, and not always offering those like top-notch, high quality um, uh, sort of things to people, that
Sure.
that we need to that we're very intentionally moving in the other direction again. And for 2026, we'll always have the pizza vendors that you all love.
Sure.
You've said it, we've heard you. And different things of that nature. But it's so tricky,
It
because
is.
it is both a community and a business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From where I am, I feel like it really just depends on the race. Some of my events, we can go all out. There's post-race food, photographers, we've got swag that's top tier, medals, buckles, everything's just top tier, and you get the full 9 yard. And then you have other events where it's more of a fundraiser for a local nonprofit. So we're going bare bones. If you want swag, it's an extra $30 because the registration fees barely covers insurance and the basic overheads, and then the rest of it is going to get donated. So for these kinds of races, I try to be completely transparent front, and it's just, here's what you're getting, here's what you're paying, and it's just a comparison is, you're paying $75 to run 9 hours versus $150 to run a 50K in the same time frame, because this is a low budget race. Money's getting donated. And that kind of contributes to having a very different feel at each of our events. And you get a very different kind of experience. But I do agree, these are always, there's always an expectation of keeping the quality consistent across all events. And that really changes the dynamic of how we approach race directing. Amy, how do you handle that? I mean, you've got Vermont 100 and some of the other races that are top tier events. So how do you go about this?
I mean, they're two very different experiences. You've got Vermont 100, is kind of over here, and that one it is a weekend long celebration, right?
Right.
And so I have everything from that. I guess I kind of run the gamut, similar to what you were saying, Shalini, where it's like I have the gamut of like Vermont 100 being kind of the big one, and then even under the Beast Coast banner, like Seven Sisters is the big one where it's like
Yeah.
we get the really nice swag every year, and like just kind of all of that stuff to, my backyard ultra. I always kid around and I tell people, it's my last race of the season. I'm like, the aid station is going to be whatever I have left over. The prizes are going to be whatever I have left over, like, you
Right.
know, and the race entry fee is pretty minimal
Yeah.
because, but I put that expectation out there, and that's part of the like vibe of the race. I mean, granted, like I actually got them like nice Boco pom-pom hats as
Yeah.
like, so it's like they're not actually getting like, it's not all shit.
What do you call them?
But at times I'm like, oh, here, for a prize, here's, what, like one year I think the prize that I gave them was like at Vermont 100 people in their drop bag, someone had left like one of those massage sticks, and someone else
Oh
had
yeah.
left one of
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
like little massage like four
Yeah.
ball thingies or whatever. And it was just like, I was like, great, here's a massage kit. Somebody's getting that as a prize. Like that's what I gave out as a prize.
Yeah.
And it's whatever, like you get what you pay
Right.
for. But like you said, I think it's important to just, for me, it's more consistent, be consistent with the Seven Sisters experience year to
Yeah.
year to
Yeah.
year. And my backyard, we call it the race for DFL.
Yeah.
It's one race where DFL is the winner. Yay. Um, but like that experience is going to be
Sure.
consistent, as
Sure.
kooky as it is. And so I at least try and build that consistency, even if there's not 100%. There's some things that are consistent across all of them, but there are ones that we make bigger deals out of or not.
Yeah, so before we get to Katie, Amy, I've noticed something with our athletes. We all have people who run 5 out of the 12 events that we're hosting in a year. And each event, I guess, has a different feel. And I think the athletes that are signing up for 5 of those 12 events actually enjoy the variation, the ups and downs, and the fact that the experience is different from one event to the other. Some events have a really grassroots vibe, and compared to another event that's a little bit more polished. Have you had any feedback from your runners about that? Do they comment on the different feel from one event to another?
Yeah, well, and I think even just when it comes to like, if every single race were as cookie cutter, then you have the shirt from every single race. And instead, like I gave out socks at one race and
Yeah,
I gave out mugs at another, and you got a hat at a different one. And so even just like little things like that to kind of recognize that it doesn't have to be this cookie cutter
yeah,
thing. But I think everyone recognizes the big events, and those are the races where they really show up. And then the other races are the races where they wear costumes and crazy sunglasses, and
sure.
the ones that we make less of a big deal out of because they're going to come and have fun.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and that's okay.
Right. So, Katie, thinking back to the earlier years with Rainshadow Running, I remember the big trend with Rainshadow events was James picking up plaids from Goodwill and handing those out. Is that still a thing? Where are you guys with that now? I know you had mentioned that you're trying to bring back more consistency with post-race experience. But talk to me a little bit about how, swag and how you're approaching all that has evolved.
Well, just back to your point, like I do think as long as you communicate what it is, that's the really important thing. And, that's probably where we have not always done the best job. So,
Sure.
making sure people know exactly what they're getting, what they're signing up for in general. Um, but then, yeah, so we have in the past, for one of our races, the Orcas 100 miler, we have bought shirts at, Goodwill's, Value Village, sort of thrift stores, and had them screen printed. Unfortunately, the person who used to do our printing no longer is able to do that. And we haven't found another screen printer yet that is sort of both within our budget and willing to take on. It's very difficult for somebody to do just a wide variety of textiles because they're all, it's a very different process than just doing a bunch of the same cotton shirt
Sure.
or that sort of thing. So we've gotten away from that, but I would like to get back towards it.
Sure.
And this is something that is more a personal ambition of mine is to I've looked into some local screen printing classes in the Seattle area that I'd love to just learn that skill, because then I'd, be able to do more of that kind of thing in-house and a little more DIY. But I have a lot of ambitions like that. Like earlier this year, I was like, oh, I'm going to get my CDL. That's what I need, because then, I don't have to like hire out these like bus drivers and all of this stuff, and like, but when am I going to find the time to do that? So, I have these ambitions for bringing some of this stuff more in-house. And in terms of swag, that's an interesting one too, because, one thing we get a lot of commentary on is that we don't give out medals. And some runners really love a medal. Like they love having that, we give buckles for our 100-milers. And this coming year, we're going to be getting back to giving high quality cups out and things of that nature, so that everybody has something tangible. But, for me personally, I've gotten a lot of medals over the years that they just end up in the trash, and I hate that waste.
Yes.
And so, and there are ways to do it where it's like people can opt in. But that's just one of those things where you can't please everybody. You kind of have to just do, be comfortable making a choice and doing your own style with things. So I think there's a balance there, because even like what you were talking about with like merchandise, you want the merchandise to be high quality so people enjoy wearing it, and it's not going to get, it's not going to go into a landfill in the next year. But by the same token, with the cost of everything going up, and merch is very expensive, and high quality merch all the more so, these are all the tricky things to balance. So I wouldn't say I have the answer, but I am in the conversation.
So I feel like some of my events, especially where we have runners who've been coming back for 10 years, I don't typically redo our medals, but every few years. I can't have a new medal every single year because my race caps are small and it just overhead's insane. I just can't afford it. But a lot of runners, as much as runners love their medals and want to have it, I also have runners who, come back every year and they're like, I don't need yet another medal. So they'll kind of bypass that. There are others that are like, hey, I paid for the medal and the swag, so I'm going to take it. What I have started doing at our end is an opt-out option for swag. I've partnered with a local nonprofit that plants trees here locally in the area. And so, people are given an option at registration. If they opt out, we'll plant a tree. And a lot of people have been choosing that over yet another cotton shirt. Unless it's something, where it's a high quality hat or a cool tech shirt, I generally get a lot of people opting out of swag. So Amy, how are you handling that on your end? Where are you guys with swag, and do you have any opt-out options?
I don't have opt out. And partly I think the flip side of that is I don't want the opt in and opt out to be a, lower income versus higher income, haves and have nots sort of thing, where it's like I want everyone to have that same experience.
Right.
And so I'm not saying that what you're doing is wrong. I just think there's like there's different ways to think about it. And at least that's the way I've thought about it. But Katy, I'm with you with like the medals, where personally, like I've run so many races. I have so many finisher medals. They're not as meaningful. And so when I took over Vermont 100, I was like, I get that people want something at the finish line. Like, hey, you just finished a 100-mile. You want to hand them something. But they used to hand them a medal. And then the next day at the award ceremony, you got a buckle. And so I was like, but like, why are we doing both? And so I hand out finisher shorts. And so you finish and you get a pair of shorts with the logo that says finisher. And people love those. And
Yeah.
it's tricky because you have to figure out sizes. Like I have to
Yeah.
ask short size at registration so that I, have finisher
Sure.
shorts. Um, but I mean, it was something, again, like Vermont Hundred's it's a little different in that it's like, it's a swag fest and it's a big
Sure.
deal and everything. But that was kind of my answer was like, I just want to give people something that they're going to use
Use.
and something
Yeah.
that they're going to need, not just a medal that for me, I hang them on doorknobs. And so at this point, every single doorknob in my house is just like covered with medals and every door dings when I open and shut it. Like it's kind of crazy. So I wanted something that they would want, right?
Right. Yeah. I was gonna say you're not using a shower curtain. Come on now.
I know. But I think like to your guys' point though, also as you're talking about like I want things to either be high quality or they have to be, I think the alternative to that is to like have things that are like quirky
Yeah.
and meaningful. And so like at my Chesterfield Gorge race, rather than like say paying for a nice trophy for the top finisher, instead what we do is it's at a gorge, it's at this river, and I go there several weeks ahead of time. I collect a bunch of rocks and then we
Yeah.
make a bunch of us paint rocks. And so the
Sure.
people that are top three get these hand painted rocks that are like Chesterfield Gorge, second place female with like, a painting of the river or a painting of the flowers or something.
Sure.
And so we kind of have a painting party, a bunch, me and a bunch of girls have a painting party. And so
Yeah.
something like that is going to be equally meaningful, but it costs me, several hours and, time,
Fine.
and
Yeah.
like $10 in paint,
Sure.
so I think there are ways to get at it and still create something meaningful that doesn't hit the budget as hard.
So one thing that I had sort of tried for a year and eventually ended up moving away from it was offering a discount if people opted out of swag. So, basically, if you opt out of swag, you can take $5 or $10 off your registration fee. I did see a bit of an uptick, but the problem with that still remained that I was having to order a bulk of swag. So it wasn't really solving anything. And I think that's where I was like, I got to shift this. And we started working with the local nonprofit, and opt out of swag ended up being funds that were donated to a good cause and, plant a tree. So that's where your swag money is going, and we're making a difference. Um, and, I think I'd rather partner with a nonprofit and do something meaningful. Um, so with that in mind, let's talk about something bigger, giving back. I think this is something everyone across the board struggles with and has at least some experience having to deal with it. It's such a loaded topic from where I am at. We're consistently talking about community, community, community. But in reality, it usually is the same 10, 15 people who are consistently involved, volunteering every single event, diving in wherever they're needed. I'm not singling anyone out, but those are the folks who really keep things moving. And that's how we're able to make these events happen. The question is, do you think this needs to be more of a cultural shift? Katie, I'll start with you. Have you experienced long-term volunteer fatigue or struggle to get enough people to host events? Because honestly, I feel like a broken record. I am constantly repeating myself, and um, I can't have a race if volunteers don't show up.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, we've been very lucky in the volunteer arena because I think we do treat our volunteers very well. They also get, all the pizza, all the food, they get credit per hour.
Sure.
And we try to create a really great environment for everybody and for them. But that that volunteer fatigue, especially with as many races that are springing up
Sure.
now, is very real because, sometimes you're hosting an event on the same weekend or the weekend after other big events. And so there is that volunteer fatigue. But where I really see that is in the trail work. That, there are, certain people in the community who are those just the quiet golden people who make it possible, who are putting the effort into the trails consistently. And I don't think that is as much a inherent part of the culture as it was many years ago, and or as it could be. I do think that also is somewhat correlated with this sort of commercialization element, where people are like, well, I'm paying for this race, that should just be done for me, sort of thing. But really understanding the larger systems of, and of the land management and how we're interacting with that. I really think a lot of work could be done to sort of raise the profile is the wrong word, but sort of like the social appreciation and currency for recognizing people who are doing that work, and to raise awareness of just how important that is. And that it really is not something that we as race directors are equipped to simply take on ourselves. That has been a major thing that's come up this year because of those Forest Service cuts that happened very suddenly. And these are agencies that were already quite stressed. They were already understaffed, and then suddenly became massively understaffed. There were 2 of our events this year where our Forest Service permit point person let us know, essentially, hey, you can still have this permit, but we're not going to have the crews out there logging out these trails that we usually do. So if you want to run this event, hold this event, you're really going to have to take responsibility for clearing those trails. And, sometimes we're talking about 50 miles of trails with just hundreds and hundreds of down trees. In some of these areas, like one of our events, White River, takes place in an area that has had some historic burns come through there. And so because of that soil quality, it's like every single winter, tons of trees come down. That's just part of the natural cycle of things right now. And, there was a time in the spring where it almost became like a second full-time job for us just to be able to get in there and clean up the trails in order to hold these events, because we'd already sold these registrations. As a lot of that money already gets spent right off the bat. Like, this is happening, and we can't have runners going through this isn't a Tough Mudder or whatever, they
liability too,
and so that's a thing that I hope more people, and I hope somehow as a community we can kind of create that vibe and that awareness and that sense of shared responsibility for making sure that if we're enjoying these trails, we're also caretaking them in these different ways. And trail work is a big way we can caretake for it. And for folks who aren't able to do that, like some people have physical limitations, and trail work is really hard on the body. So, if they can't do that, like, taking a little trash bag with you every time you go for a run on a trail, and picking up some trash, leaving it better than you found it. Like, these are all these different ways that we can be caretaking for these spaces that are giving us so much.
Amy, have you had?
No, I was going to say, like, I just exactly what you were saying, Katy, where it's like, I guess I would further, I wrote an article, I think a couple of years ago for Ultrarunning magazine about this specific topic. And partly because I'm not saying I know the answer, but if you look at mountain biking culture, snowmobiling culture, trail work is so much more ingrained in the community. And I'm not quite sure why trail running doesn't include it. And so I didn't have answers to it, but that was one of those things that I just noticed, like even on my local trails, like the New England Mountain Bike Association, NIMBA, like every once in a while on the trail, and they've built another bog bridge. They're out there, built, rerouting trails, taking down, down trees, all of that stuff. And when I host a trail work day, I get 6 or 8 people to sign up, and that's it. The flip side is, though, I will say what is amazing about the trail community is, partly why I was conjecturing in this article was 2 weeks before one of my races, we had an ice storm hit us. And so all of a sudden it was just, 25 miles of trails with trees everywhere. It was carnage. And I had a panic attack and just was like, I don't think this race is going to happen. I put the call out to the local community, and the number of people that stepped up, that went out there, we kind of had 3 crews. I had this email list of like 30 people in the community that some of them were going out and scouting. Okay, where are there trees where I can just chuck? And then where are there things that need a chainsaw? And then communicating where we needed a chainsaw with the people that had the chainsaws. And like this whole, at some point, I wasn't able to get at a computer for a couple of days. And the conversation just happened without me even having to facilitate. People just saying, hey, I checked out this. Hey, we need something over here. Hey, can you go over there? And it was this beautiful thing. So I think our community steps up when there's a need in a beautiful way. And I want to give us credit for that. But when it comes to things like just kind of that day-to-day general maintenance, I'm very conscious of it now that like if I'm out running with some friends and there's like a limb down, we all just kind of step over and keep running. And I'm like, why didn't one of us just stop and fling it off the trail? It would take 1 second, but I'm trying to change my own narrative and be a little more conscious of that. And hopefully even just the people that I'm running with being like, hey, let's just take those few seconds and just toss that limb, pick up that wrapper that you see on the trail. Like sometimes we just get such tunnel vision, but even there's, like Katie said, there's these little things that you could do that do make a difference. And that we're not necessarily taking the opportunity to do.
Yeah.
So. And then when it comes to like trail work in general, so that's my like soapbox on trail work. But
I could go on.
Volunteering in general, like Vermont 100, I mean, it's an old school 100-miler. We do still have a volunteer requirement to sign up. We have a buyout fee, so people can buy out of volunteering. It kind of breaks my heart how many people
will just
pay the buyout fee. I'm like, I'm only asking 8 hours of volunteering over a 16-month period or a 15-month period leading up to the race. 8 hours. Like it's not a ton. And I get that it's a barrier for people, but one of the things, that I always say when people are, concerned about it or kind of get their hackles up about it. I mean, one, that's how this community happens. And, Vermont 100, at times I'm buying 500 volunteer shirts for a 450 person race. So it takes one volunteer per runner. And so when you think about that, think about somebody else is giving that time in order for you to participate. So kind of just putting it that way. But the other thing that I say is just like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, there are a lot of ways to volunteer, and there are ways to volunteer that aren't necessarily on race day. So if you can't get to a race, if you don't even have the time, like I had somebody a couple of years, they volunteered by taking 30 years of Seven Sisters data and crunching it all together. So I knew age group records, hours and hours and hours of time in an Excel spreadsheet. But that was their volunteer time because they were able to do that in the time that they wanted. Somebody else that was local to me, I dropped off a bunch of yellowed plates and some spray paint, and they made my arrows for Vermont 100, 1 year. And so there's not always something, but a lot of times there are little opportunities like that. I used to volunteer by running snowshoe races. And when I finished a snowshoe race, I would ask the race director, hey, can I clear the course for you? I needed to do a cool down anyway. I'm going to clear the course. I get an hour of volunteer time. I get my cool down in, I get my long run in, and the race director saves some time. It's, like win-win-win all around. So I think there are opportunities like that if you get creative and you just ask a race director what they need, or you go to your town and just say, hey, can I organize a trail work day? A lot of times the local conservation commissions, they have work that has to get done. They welcome you to go and do it. They'll point you in the right direction and sign off on the form. So,
and I was going to say, the volunteer requirement for races, that really does help a lot. But there's still a lot of education that needs to happen to bring about the cultural shift that we've been talking about. people need to realize that, buying out of trail work and just throwing some money doesn't necessarily help, because these are trails that we're running day in and day out, and trail work requires effort, volunteer effort needs to go into it. So just take a day, one day out of your entire year and go volunteer, do trail work. And as Katie had mentioned, if you're not physically able to do the trail work, do the hard work, there are plenty of other ways to help. Same with Amy. I've had volunteers who simply take the in-ground flags and put reflective tape on them because they're not physically able to do the hard labor. And that's hours and hours of time that I save. So even those small contributions make a huge difference. And I'm not having to lose my shit over, 700 flags that suddenly now need reflective tape. I think unless you're actively approaching a race director and saying, hey, what can I do? And asking what they need help with, it's tough. Because honestly, I can put a call out all day, every day, and it's still always the same 15, 20 people who are always stepping up and saying, I'm here, whatever you need help with. For others, I think a lot of it comes down to anxiety for some people. They don't really know what the environment is going to be like. And suddenly, you're surrounded by 7, 8 other strangers. That uncertainty keeps them from volunteering. I don't know what the perfect solution here is. But my biggest frustration is wishing more people would go out and do trail work. That's the piece I feel we're really missing.
I also see it as part of a larger need to shift our community and cultural perspective towards how we're interacting with these lands. I've learned a lot and have a lot more to learn, but I've learned a lot from there's a local indigenous tribe, the Snoqualmie tribe, who has done a lot of education with the Snoqualmie tribe ancestral lands movement. And some of their points around recreation being respectful and not based in conquest and entitlement, but rather in a really respectful, loving relationship with the land. I think there's so much indigenous wisdom and that we could look to and learn from about how we relate to these spaces and understand our role within them. Sure. That isn't always centered in our own lives and goals and conquests but rather in a much deeper understanding and respect for who's come before us, who the stewards and caretakers and people of the land really are, and those ways of being that I just think we have so much as a culture to learn from and to move in that direction. And I think sort of a larger sense of moving towards that different and really respectful relationship with the land is part of that. And that's where that value and that impetus of that giving back and that caretaking and also, kind of tying it back to those issues of like understanding climate justice and all of these other issues that are huge issues for us as race directors, as we see, I don't know in your area, in your areas, in the Pacific Northwest here, climate change in the last 10 years has had a huge impact on the ability to put on races, because we're seeing these extreme weather events. We're seeing these regular summer forest fires and smoke seasons that were never a regular feature, and all kinds of other warming and global change and climate change trends that are really significant. So I think that's all really connected, and trail work is one way that we show our connection, appreciation, giving back, and being in this really respectful, reciprocal way with the land, rather than just an entitled relationship to it, where we show up and sort of take from it, but don't necessarily give back.
Yeah, just to echo that, there are several trail segments that I have been running for 15 years, and some of them weren't built sustainably in the first place. With the climate change, rain washouts, those trails are deteriorating and are in need of rerouting. But if we were not actively doing trail work, eventually those trails just won't be usable. They're going to cease to exist. Whether, it's for personal runs or hosting events, I really do feel that if people would step up, understand how closely trail running events and trail work are tied together, and hosting races is going to become incredibly challenging if people aren't giving back. Amy, do you have anything to add to that before we move on to what might be our last topic for the evening?
I don't know that I have anything else to add. I think this is a space that I think both of what you guys shared is giving me some ideas for ways that I can continue to evolve. So it's great to hear.
All right. So the last question, and I think this ties into the broader theme of evolution, is how do we increase female athlete participation in events? It's definitely come a long way, but there is a long way to go. Of course, this connects to the bigger conversation about inclusion and diversity and how we can make these spaces more welcoming. Amy, I'd love to hear your thoughts from your own racing experience or from hosting events. What barriers have you seen for women, and what steps have you taken to engage more female athletes?
First of all, I'm curious to hear what creative ideas you guys have, because I think it's a space, Shalini, I think you and I have both been in ultra running for a while. Katy, I don't know how long you've been in, but I'm going on 20 years now, towing the line in trail and ultras. And so on one hand, I do want to say I see a lot more female and I see a lot more recognition of females in the trail races. And so I do want to at least acknowledge how far it's come.
Yeah,
back in the day, they didn't even have female running vests, or giving out female specific shirts was not the standard. It was unusual, and I feel like sometimes my friends who are newer in the sport, I'm like the back in my day, but I feel like I'm saying that just because it has come so far. So I do at least want to recognize it's come so far. Still, though, numbers like I was just looking at my Seven Sisters race. Again, the bigger race, one of the bigger races that I do, 500 athletes, and it's about 35% female. So, we've got 1/3 female, 2/3 male. Very small percentage identifying as non-binary in there, which I don't have that number off the top of my head. And that's one, I've tried different things to try to shift that. Haven't necessarily seen the numbers when it comes to race day shift. So one of the things that I've done, and frankly, I've taken a lot of hate mail on this policy, but one of the things that we do is we open up registration 2 days early for people who identify as female, LGBTQ, BIPOC, and I think athletes with disabilities. So basically any minority in the trail space is allowed to register 2 days early. And I do say, because of all the white, straight white men that give me hate mail because of it, I do say, this is only up to 50% of the race entry fees.
Sure,
So if I
sure.
had this overwhelming percent of females that all registered in those 2 days, I would cap that at 250, and then it opens for general registration for everyone else. 2 days
Yeah,
after that
yeah, yeah.
first thing. But the point is just to make sure that, this race fills in the matter of a couple of hours. So to make sure
Sure.
that if I happen to open up registration when a mom is putting their baby down
Yeah, yeah.
for a nap, they don't miss out because they were otherwise obligated. Or if somebody who isn't working a 9 to 5 job because that's just who they are, but they're a minority in the space, that we're making the space for them to ensure registration. Um, Normally, when I at least look at the initial list of who has registered, it's showing a higher percentage of women, but then when it translates down to who actually starts the race 5 months later, I'm still seeing like the numbers don't
Yeah,
necessarily.
I mean, there's a vast disparity in the numbers.
Yes.
It
Yeah.
could start
So,
off as,
um,
yeah,
yeah. And so that's one thing that at least we're trying. I wish that I could say, yes, now we're up to 40% consistently, but I haven't necessarily seen a significant shift when it comes to race day participation. Um, so yeah, and then like I mean, we've started doing small things, which I'm sure you guys do as well, of having like, lactation tents out on
sure,
course to just have, the ability of, females who are lactating to be able to have a space to do that on the race course so
sure,
that that's not a barrier. So it's like I'm, having menstrual products in all of the porta potties, so it's
sure.
like these little things that I don't know if it moves the needle or not, but we're trying.
Yeah,
Um, One thing that I don't know if any of you guys have figured this out. I would love, love, love to figure out a way to have childcare as an option,
yeah,
but I
that's a tough
haven't
one.
figured out
Yeah,
how to, for like, obviously you can't do that for a ton of people, but I don't know how to do
sure.
that without like taking on liability that I don't know that
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
comfortable with. But that is like this vision that I have that we would love to make happen to again just open the door. Oh, and the other thing that we're doing is I do panel discussions leading up to some of my races to try to just make sure the education is there. I do
Sure.
training runs on the courses, and stuff like that. So those are some of the other things that I'm just trying to make sure that people, um, at least I suspect that some of the female participation comes from not being confident if they can finish it or not
Right,
feeling like they, have the time on the course that they, I don't know. I'm at least trying to combat the portions
sure.
of it that I can, but I still think there's a lot of gaps and there's a lot of other things I could be doing. So,
Yeah. Yeah, thinking back on it, I feel like shorter distance events tend to see a higher uptick in female participation. In fact, we've had some 15Ks where female registrations actually outnumbered the male athletes. But once you get into higher distances, 50 miles and up, that number really takes a nosedive. And I shouldn't say I don't know why, because the most common reason I hear has to do with childcare and the sheer amount of training time that's required when you commit to distances 50 miles and over. That's what comes down to it, again and again, the conversation with runners. Katie, what about you guys? What does your data show? What kind of projects have you put in motion to address this?
Yeah, some of what you both have described are trends that we see as well, for sure. And I will say that I also am coming from the perspective of I believe very strongly that all of the gender equity issues that are related to trans and gender expansive people are very much also connected to women and the gender equity issues that women face. And in fact, a lot of the sort of anti-trans legislation and things that we see happening have created abusive experiences for cisgender women.
Right.
Um, and so, I do think that being trans affirmative is also being women affirmative. Um, I also just think that there's so much within the culture that it is not created for women and for women and gender expansive people, but women's sense of belonging.
Yeah.
The fact that, I mean, and even things that are so much part of the air we breathe, in our culture that I almost don't even think about it or notice it anymore. But like, yeah, that lactating parents, don't have the safety to be able to feed their child, but men can run around without shirts on with no fear of harassment or whatever. um it kind of gets my goat a little bit when I see the dudes who are right by me on the trail who just sort of turn to pee, and
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
like,
yeah. Yeah.
like that's a major issue, both in terms of the women athletes who have to sacrifice time in order to find a private place to do that, and also the fact that like a lot of unfortunately, a lot of women who have experienced various forms of harassment and abuse, it includes being shown penises when we don't want to be shown penises,
Right. Right.
and things of that nature, and that can be unpleasant, or it can be a visual metaphor for who this space is supposedly for and who it
Right.
isn't.
Right.
Um, and even things like some of our language around things like, do we really need to still be calling things fat ass? Can we just shift that and say badass?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because fat phobia is something that falls on women, and in fact is like has deep roots in racial inequity as well. That is just so much part of the air we breathe for those of us who have been doing these races for so long. I think we don't even think about it. It just rolls off our back. But for,
Yeah.
I've spoken to a lot of people who are newer to the sport who are like, what the heck? Why, for anyone who that's been used as a derogatory slur against, it lands very differently.
Yeah.
And all of the, and then also, so many women experience sexual harassment in these spaces.
Yeah.
I have personally experienced that in the trail running space. I know, I mean, there are just countless Me Too stories of other women who've experienced that as
Sure.
well. And a lot of the the language and the sort of old boys club vibe,
Oh, yeah.
and a
Yeah.
lot of the what
Absolutely. Yeah.
flies, is still, leaves a lot to be desired. But I do think that piece too, certainly childcare and just the inequities that women already experience in not getting paid as much, or particularly women who are in heteronormative relationships where, now we have more situations where you have two people working full time in the household, and yet the woman is often still the person doing the
Oh,
vast
yeah.
majority of the labor,
Caretaking. Yeah.
whether that's childcare, household labor, emotional labor, all of it. And also dealing with, having to deal with all kinds of safety concerns that cisgender male runners don't have to think about when
Yeah.
they're out there training.
Yeah.
All of these things are heavy and pervasive. I do think childcare is an area where, I too have looked into, what would it mean if we were able to somehow provide some childcare? Unfortunately, the sort of realities of the liability issues
I
and
know. I was
also
going to
the
say that's,
licensing issues that would be
yeah,
required,
it's
because depending
humongous.
on the space that you're doing it in, you essentially would have to go through some of the hoops of being licensed like a daycare, depending
Sure.
on the
Sure.
state that you're in, or like an outdoor camp. So it's very complex that way. However, I do think, that is something where, maybe there's more space for community solutions, in the form of like mutual aid of people who, want to support each other and other runners in the community who are having these access issues. I can think of many runners, in our community who have essentially done that for each other and for other runners at some of our
Yeah.
events of like, oh, while you run this distance, I'll watch your
A
kiddos, and
bunch of
while,
kids. Yeah.
and some folks who've even reached out to us to let us know that they're happy to do that for any runners who might need that,
Yeah.
which is wonderful. And again, it's a tricky position as a race director to be the facilitator of that,
Yeah.
because it
I would
does
not want to.
expose
Yeah.
us
Yeah.
to, an enormous amount of liability and
Liability.
logistics. But I do think community solutions for that are really where it's at. I would love to see more of those solutions being discussed and driven by men stepping up to take on some of those roles, because I've had a lot of those conversations and they have predominantly been with women, who are like willing to do more labor to jump in there. And, and so, I mean, I also just think that the basic recognition that we haven't achieved equity in any sense. I think so many people feel like, oh, look how far we've come. We're great now. Why are you still complaining? Having this really fundamental understanding of recognizing that those inequities still exist very deeply and cut very deeply, and all the more so for runners who experience multiple layers of marginalization. I think just keeping that awareness in our forefront as well is something that is part of the stew that will help more of these community solutions sort of bubble forth, because it is deeply needed. Yeah.
Yeah, so from my end, I think representation really matters. Having a female race director can ease some of the tension or anxiety women feel when signing up for a race. I've also noticed that as a female race director, there can be underhanded bullying directed at female athletes or a female race director. It's subtle, but it's there. That's part of the reason we host women's only group runs. These group runs give women a space to share ideas and talk openly about things like, here's why I can't train for a 50K right now, or here's what's holding me back. Those runs have been really effective for engaging female athletes in the community. Another program that we have done for a couple of years now is tied into one of the hardest 53K that I host here in the area. We offer free coaching to a small group of women, 3 in the first year, who sign up through a simple application process. It's worked really well, given female athletes a chance to run their first ultra with full coaching support without having to pay for that piece. There's a 20% discount on race registration. And honestly, having a coach makes you accountable than saying, I'll run this 50K when my kids are older. So programs like that have been successful, but I agree that there's a long way to go. I'm constantly brainstorming and trying to come up with new ways to make the space more inclusive. Amy, what are your thoughts on this before we wrap up this episode?
So, I mean, I know there's so much more we can be doing, right? So I think it's great to hear what you guys are doing. There's a race director that I know, female race director that I know from down in the New Jersey area. And she does what she calls like I think it's like Trail Academy or something. And I again, like I steal ideas from other people very openly, right? And so one of the things that I try and do is I try and do like several webinars every year. And so some of those are just panel discussions leading up to races. But one of the things that I've done in the past is I've had a women's only panel where we have women openly talking about running through pregnancy, running post-pregnancy, how to run as a mother, how to run through menopause, kind of all of these issues. This year we had a webinar with a woman who is, she specializes in menopause. And so she just it was all about menopause and perimenopause and what that does to your body. And you can run through that. And so again, like, I think there's still a lot that I can be doing, but I'm trying to just do what I can to have these conversations and to bring in people that know way more than I do to educate us, so that at least hopefully that's removing one barrier. There's still so many, but it's removing one barrier for participation. But I'd love to see more of those conversations happening. Because I still think, a lot of it, even the training plans that are out there, like you can go online and download a training plan, but it's probably written by a male and geared for male athletes. And how would it look
Yeah.
slightly different if that weren't true? And so just kind of a lot of these things in general, the nutritional
Yeah.
guidance that you're going to get from the companies, again, it's that, I mean, that's just science in general, right?
Right.
Is a lot
Right.
of it is based on um, the male perspective. And so just even having these conversations to get the differences in the female body and the female experience as
Yeah.
part of the conversation. I just think that's important. But again, like there's so much more we can do.
Yeah. I think open
I keep
discussions
eyeing
are.
on, to your point, Katie. I'm hoping I can make this happen before the end of the year, but I'm trying to coordinate a self-defense class for
Yeah.
women to have, again, just to allow the female trail runners to feel a little more confident to maybe run alone by having a couple of those skills to be able to just defend themselves if they're on the trail and something happens, if they're running alone
Sure.
and something happens. And so again, it's hopefully I can make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those open discussions are really important. As you said, with female bodies, the science matters. Hormonal cycles from day 1 to day 30 means you're not running the same every day. And so much of that impacts your ability to train, to race, and to even just get out on the trails consistently.
Fuel, to sleep,
You're
to
right.
like
Right.
everything,
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for joining me and sharing your perspectives today. I picked up a lot, and I'll admit I'll be borrowing some of the ideas from your websites. But that's the beauty of this, the conversation, the learning, evolving, and hopefully setting ourselves for an even better year ahead. Best wishes to both of you for next season, and hopefully we can sit down again at the end of next year and hash out a few more of our grievances, so to speak. Thank you again for being here, and with that, it's a wrap on season 1. We'll be back in the new year, kicking off season 2 with some of the most iconic race directors in the ultra running world. Stay tuned for a sneak peek at what's ahead on the TURD Podcast. Thanks to everyone for tuning in to today's episode. For more information on the TURD Podcast, visit us at terraintrailrunners.com or give us a follow on our social media channels. Until next time, don't forget to say thank you to your race directors. We appreciate it, and it makes the job so worth doing.